The god who kept ancient Egypt alive was not the sun god Ra, the royal god Horus, or even Osiris, lord of resurrection. He was a blue or green-skinned figure with heavy breasts, a rounded belly, and armfuls of food. His name was Hapi, and his body encoded the event on which every Egyptian harvest depended, the annual flooding of the Nile. To understand his unusual form is to uncover how Egyptians transformed a dangerous natural cycle into a vision of abundance, order, and political unity. Hapi was not the god of the Nile in every possible sense. Egyptian religion rarely assigned a single phenomenon to only one deity. Khnum, worshipped especially at Elephantine near modern Aswan, guarded the southern river and was associated with its sources. Osiris was linked to fertile soil, vegetation, death, and renewal. Satet and Anuket also belonged to the sacred landscape of the First Cataract. Hapi's more specific role was the inundation itself. The swelling waters that entered fields, filled basins, deposited fertile silt, and made cultivation possible. Before modern dams regulated the river, Egypt lived by that pulse. The flood generally began rising in southern Egypt during early summer and reached its height later in the season. Its ultimate causes lay far beyond the Pharaohs' realm. Seasonal rains over the Ethiopian highlands poured into the Blue Nile and Atbara, carrying water and sediment northward, while the White Nile provided a steadier flow. Ancient Egyptians knew the flood arrived from the south, but they could not see this enormous climatic system. Religious geography, therefore, located its mysterious emergence near Egypt's southern frontier. Texts and monuments connect Hapi with a hidden cavern or source in the region of the First Cataract. Yet this was never Egypt's only explanation. At Elephantine, inscriptions emphasize Khnum's control over the river, while later traditions associated different sacred places with the flood's origin. The famous famine stela on Sehel Island describes the Nile failing for 7 years under King Djoser and presents Khnum as master of the inundation. But the stela was carved in the Ptolemaic period, more than 2,000 years after Djoser, so it reveals late religious and political claims rather than an eyewitness record of an old kingdom famine. Hapi appears most vividly in the Hymn to the Nile, preserved in New Kingdom copies, including school texts written by scribes. The composition may have older roots, although its precise date remains debated. The hymn praises the river as one who brings food, creates grain, fills storehouses, and makes every workshop prosper. It even calls the inundation hidden, because no one knows the place from which it comes. That mystery is central to Hapi's meaning. The Egyptians observed the flood carefully, yet its distant mechanism remained invisible. The hymn also reveals that Hapi was more than agricultural decoration. When the inundation was sufficient, fields produced emmer wheat, barley, flax, vegetables, and fodder. Cattle could feed, boats could travel along replenished channels, laborers could be provisioned, and temples could receive offerings. When it was too low, hunger threatened. When it was unusually high, water could damage settlements, dikes, and stored goods. Hapi represented abundance, but abundance required balance. Like Egyptian order itself, the beneficial flood occupied a narrow space between deficiency and chaos. Officials therefore measured the river. Nilometers, stone stairways, wells, or marked installations connected to the Nile, allowed observers to monitor water levels. Surviving examples at places such as Elephantine, Kom Ombo, and Rhoda Island belong to different periods and were rebuilt over time. Measurements could help administrators anticipate crop prospects and taxation, though the precise operation of these systems varied by era. Religion did not replace practical observation. Egyptians prayed to Hapi, while also maintaining canals, embankments, basin fields, records, and grain reserves. Hapi's body makes this combination of nature and meaning visible. He was usually represented as male, often wearing a false beard or kilt, but with pendulous breasts and a full belly. Older writers sometimes called this androgynous, and the term can be useful if handled carefully. Hapi was not simply depicted as half man and half woman, nor do Egyptian texts present him as a modern statement about gender identity. His anatomy instead emphasizes fecundity and nourishment, a male divine personification given the bodily signs of feeding and plenty. His skin could be blue, evoking water, or green, evoking vegetation and renewal. He often carried trays piled with bread, fruit, flowers, birds, fish, or other products of the river valley. Papyrus plants might identify Lower Egypt in the north, while lotus or lily imagery could signify Upper Egypt in the south. Although botanical identifications and artistic conventions are not always perfectly consistent, the point was not to portray an ordinary human body. Hapi's flesh was a theological diagram, water becoming fertility, fertility becoming food. Temple reliefs often show rows of rounded, fecundity figures bringing offerings to a king or deity. Some are identified as Hapi figures, while others personify provinces, estates, or productive regions. They carry the wealth of Egypt on trays and sometimes bear place names. These images turn geography into a procession of nourishment. The land itself approaches the divine world, delivering fish, fowl, flowers, grain, and livestock. What modern viewers might mistake for an unusual portrait was, to an Egyptian audience, a recognizable image of resources made abundant. Hapi also participated in the idea of the two lands. Egypt was imagined as Upper Egypt, the southern river valley, and Lower Egypt, the northern delta. In uniting the two lands scenes, paired fecundity figures bind papyrus and lotus plants around the hieroglyphic sign for union. These figures are frequently described as paired hapis, although interpretation can depend on the monument and inscription. On royal thrones, including examples associated with kings such as Senusret-I and Ramesses-I, the motif declares that opposing regions have been tied into one ordered kingdom. That political symbolism did not mean pharaohs literally controlled rainfall in Ethiopia. It meant kingship claimed responsibility for maintaining Ma'at, the proper order linking gods, nature, society, and ritual. A successful ruler presented offerings, maintained temples, organized labor, managed land, and protected storage systems. If the flood and harvest flourished, royal ideology treated that prosperity as evidence of harmony. If disaster struck, texts might explain it through divine displeasure or failed order, even though real outcomes depended on climate, local administration, pests, disease, and stored reserves. Hapi should not be confused with Hapi, one of the four sons of Horus, whose name is often spelt similarly in English. That Hapi was a funerary protector associated with the lungs and commonly represented with a baboon head on canopic equipment. The Nile Hapi is the swollen, offering-bearing personification of inundation. The confusion is modern and linguistic. The figures had different roles, appearances, and religious contexts within Egyptian tradition. After the completion of the Aswan High Dam in the 20th century, the old annual inundation ceased to govern Egyptian agriculture in the same way. Water could be stored and released, floods controlled, and fields irrigated throughout the year, though damming also trapped much of the sediment that once renewed the floodplain. Modern hydrology can trace the Nile's waters to rainfall, tributaries, evaporation, and catchment systems. Yet science does not make Hapi meaningless. It helps reveal exactly what Egyptians were trying to express. Hapi was not a primitive guess about a river spirit. He was a compressed explanation of dependence. His blue-green skin represented water and growth. His breasts and belly represented nourishment. His offerings represented the economy. His paired forms represented a united country, and his hidden source represented the limits of knowledge. In Hapi, the Egyptians gave a body to the chain, connecting distant rain, rising water, black silt, grain, taxation, temples, and survival. The god's hidden meaning was therefore visible everywhere. Egypt understood that beneath every crown, every monument, and every prayer flowed a river no king could command alone.